Right, good morning, good afternoon, welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today marks the beginning of a new series, one of several that I'm trying to get going at the same time. This one I'm hoping will be fairly quick and easy to do because it is just a quick guide of some of the fossil sites on the Yorkshire coast, where to go, what to look out for where possible. But of course, this is based on my experiences. It will change depending on the weather and the tides on the given day, and it may change from when I record this, which is in mid 2023. First things first, we're going to have a look at Saltwick Bay. Saltwick Bay is probably the site that everyone gets directed to see first when they move to the Yorkshire coast to go fossil hunting on the Yorkshire coast. It's the easiest one to get to, easiest one to get down to, and easiest one to find fossils, I reckon. So it's the one that's highly rated on all of the sites. If you are driving to Saltwick Bay, you're going to want to put in the Whitby Holiday Park. This is your GPS coordinate. You come down the road here, up this road, and in this section, just before you get to the park itself, there is a bit of communal parking that you can take advantage of. It is sometimes very busy, especially on really nice days through the summer. So do keep an eye out for this. If this is full, you can park on some parts of the road. You follow the law. I'm not going to tell you where to go. Otherwise, the other one here is a big parking lot for Whitby Abbey, and then you can just walk back to Saltwick Bay. So you can do that, pay and display. If you're getting public transport into Whitby, for example, I was taking the buses, you come in next to Whitby train station down here. There's a little bus stop right inside here. Also, there's buses that run from the north and down from Scarborough as well. They all come into just by the Whitby train station. You can then walk across the swing bridge, up through here, up the steps and towards Whitby Abbey, and you can then follow the coastal path along, and that will get you down into the holiday park. When you get to the holiday park, if you have a look on this Google Map image, when it loads in, there we go, you can see this wiggly path down here. So there's actually a set of steps and cut in sections that you can walk down. It's heavily traversed, but it's actually doable. There's a few slightly wonky steps that are different heights. There's a few bits that are slightly higher than others. But you can do this with kids. I've done this walk with kids sort of 3 to 5 years of age. So this bit's not too bad to do. When you get down onto the beach, you do not really want to fossil hunt any of the sandy sections. So this whole section here is not worth hunting. What I would suggest is that you walk along and past this section about 3 hours after the high tide is the recommendation for most of the sites in Whitby. You might find that the tide still comes into this section of rocks just here. And if that's the case, you may have to scramble up and above. You don't tend to find a huge amount here because this is the bit that everyone fossil hunts, but you can find stuff there depending on falls, and there are some fairly active bits of falls that do occur across here. If you want to start looking, there's a little tiny section of beach just in about here where a lot of the loose nodules get washed into, and sometimes it's worth having a look in there. They all tend to be very worn, but sometimes they pop quite nicely. As you then come around this corner, there's a bit of sort of coastal defense that marks this sort of L shape here. You can climb up and over this and walk around, and you can get around the headland that way. Do note that this section is pretty slippery. As the tide goes out, you can then walk around this section here, and that's a lot easier. But just be aware, this is slippery. There's a shipwreck here. It's not easy to see on the sat image. As the tide goes out, it gets a lot clearer. This whole section actually is very slippery, so if you're walking it, do be careful. As you keep coming around, this section is the first bit that a lot of people prospect. It's also worth prospecting because you do find stuff here coming out of the fall, so the big fall here, that this erodes out onto. You can keep walking all the way along this section. All of this is productive. There's various levels of falls that have happened over the last few months and years. So as you can see, there's a fall here, falls here, falls here. So do wander around and have a look at all of this. You'll find that some of them are more productive than others, and on any given day, you will have different amounts of success in different sections. You do not need to get in underneath the cliffs to find things. There is a lot that can be found pretty much along the washed edges. So if you see where the water comes in, walk along the edges of that and you'll find plenty of things in Saltwick. The Dactyloceras ammonites, the most common ones, tend to not split very well from Saltwick. That is the problem with it, but you do get lots and lots of them, so you might get lucky with a split. The other thing that you do find that are really nice are some of the Hildoceras ammonites that you find from the sections in around here. So do have a look for those. You can come all the way down here, and when the tide is out, you can actually either clamber over the top of this headland or around it. And there's a few more bits of section beach down here on Whitby High that you can hunt. I've never had a lot of luck, but it tends to be the least prospected areas. So again, if there's any falls, you might find things in here. I will point out that there is a rope down from Hornblower Lodge down onto the beach. This is not something I would recommend. It is not an easy rope to get down. There are obviously far more treacherous ones, but just because there are worse ones doesn't mean it's a good one to go down. If you want to go down it, you do so at your own risk, and you will find it somewhere near Hornblower Lodge. I'm not going to point it out directly. I leave that up to you to find if you want to use it. But if you are using it, it is at your own risk, and would strongly suggest you take plenty of safety gear if you're going to do it. It is also the safe high spot if you do get cut off, because most of this coast will get cut off at high tide. If you have a look at this, you can see all of this section is all wet all the way along, and you can see the green from where it's been underwater. So if you are, at whatever reason, you get your times really wrong, you come in around from a different point, you can actually stay here. This stays dry and is far enough away from cliffs you can find some safe spots until the tide goes back out. The other thing to note is most of this section of coast from pretty much the headland here around, you will not get signal in it. So if you're around here and something happens, you'll have to come back to get signal for your phone, and you do tend to start getting signal again here. A good rule of thumb is if you cannot see civilization from the shore, you won't get signal. If you can see houses, high peaks, anywhere that's got a radio mast, you will probably get phone signal, but as you come around the headland, you stop being able to see that, and so you won't get any signal around this section. So do be aware of that. The other option that you can do from Saltwick Bay is you follow the coast up and you get to this other headland. This is the Saltwick Nab, and then you can come over the top of this and around, and you basically follow the shore underneath the Whitby Abbey down here, and you can come back up, and there's a little ramp down here. This is worth doing, but I do give you several big cautions. The first is this headland here is difficult to get around and is incredibly slippery. This goes underwater every single high tide, and it is always super slimy around Saltwick. Now, there's also this bit here is difficult to get around and across. It's a narrow ledge. Best done when it's actually low tide, very low tide, and you can actually walk that way around. You can fossil hunt the whole section back here, but again, note, even on this sat image, you can see the water comes up a long way. You can see the green on the rocks and the tides. This is the big cut-off section here. I believe all of this gets cut off at high tide, but this one here only gives you a few minutes of access unless you're willing to scramble over the rocks here. This is a coastal defense system set up underneath the buildings here. These, basically, the water comes up to these all the way up to close to low tide. So you have to either scramble, except that you might get slightly wet feet if you go, depending on the tides. One other thing worth noting is the status of the rocks. So this section here, from the breakwater around to Saltwick Nab, and in fact it comes down to about here, this is all triple SI. So it's a special site of scientific interest, or a site of special scientific interest, and it means that this is all protected. There's no hammering into the bedrocks, there's no hammering into cliffs. I would strongly suggest, even on sites that are not triple SI, that you do not hammer into the bedrock and do not hammer into the cliffs unless you know what you're looking for when it comes to the foreshore, the bedrock, and never hammer into the cliffs, because there's a risk that they will come down on top of you. So that would be the thing to look out for here. This section is not triple SI, so you can pick up stuff, you can hammer into the bedrock, but as I've just said, unless you know what you're looking for, unless it's something truly spectacular, do not hammer into the bedrock. It's better to take a photo of it to GPS and ask someone who knows. I'm more than happy to point you at people if necessary. Anything that you find in the bedrock, in the shale, when it comes to ammonites, they tend to be highly compressed in this section. They are not worth trying to collect and will crumble and crack unless you are very, very good with preparing them. It is not worth you trying to dig them out. So please don't dig out ammonites that are shale preserved here. They're just not worth it. And all you're doing is it causing more erosion on a coast that's eroding heavily already. So that's the simplest section for Saltwick Nab. That would be my advice if you're ever looking to get there. So I hope that was useful.